Federal authorities have just executed one of the largest human trafficking crackdowns of the year. A sweeping, multi-state operation that exposed a massive network of Chinese-run massage parlors quietly embedded in American communities. In a relentless week-long campaign known as Operation Coast to Coast, over 30 suspects were arrested and more than 60 victims were rescued from a life of forced labor and sexual exploitation. The investigation's sheer scale shocked even veteran agents, not only because of how far the network had spread, but because of how seamlessly it had blended into everyday American life. From Texas and California to New York, Missouri, and Oklahoma, what seemed like ordinary storefronts and suburban wellness centers were actually nodes in a transnational criminal enterprise. For years, many assumed this kind of trafficking happened only along the nation's borders or within major cities. But this week's coordinated raids shattered that illusion. What authorities uncovered was a highly organized structure, a vast underground economy hiding in plain sight. These operations trafficked women across state lines, moving profits through international pipelines that led back to powerful criminal syndicates in China. Each business, each spa, was part of a system built on coercion, confinement, and profit. Homeland Security Investigations agents described the network as functioning like an industrial cartel, disciplined, secretive, and deeply entrenched. Victims were rotated between states, business licenses were forged, and millions of dollars were laundered through shell companies disguised as legitimate wellness consultancies. Behind the curtains of these so-called spas were lives held captive. Women, mostly Chinese nationals, were lured through fraudulent job postings promising legal work in America. Once they arrived, their passports were seized, their freedom stripped away, and their days reduced to endless shifts under constant watch. Many slept on thin mattresses behind massage tables or in makeshift dorms hidden inside storage rooms. Cameras tracked their every move. The air smelled of bleach, sweat, and fear. Investigators said the conditions were not just exploitative, they were industrialized. Entire blocks of businesses were discovered to be connected by hidden hallways and false walls, proof of how methodically the Syndicate had built its shadow empire. The raids themselves unfolded with military precision. In the early hours, tactical units from Homeland Security, the Austin Police Department, and more than 150 partner agencies moved in on over 20 locations simultaneously. In one city block alone, agents breached 3 adjacent storefronts that shared a single concealed passageway, a stunning sign of how deeply the operation had infiltrated local infrastructure. What agents uncovered inside defied belief. Each arrest dismantled another piece of a sprawling system that merged labor exploitation with financial crime. This was not the work of rogue business owners. It was an organized network, complete with command and control hubs overseas. Agents seized encrypted phones, computers, and ledgers filled with thousands of messages between US-based facilitators and Chinese coordinators who handled client lists, payment routing, and victim transfers. The digital trail pointed unmistakably to long-standing organized crime groups in China, syndicates that have been under federal scrutiny for years. For U.S. law enforcement, this week's crackdown delivered 2 unmistakable messages. First, that human trafficking operations are no longer confined to border zones or coastal hubs. They are already embedded deep inside America's heartland. Second, that federal agencies are now mobilizing against them with the same intensity they reserve for terrorism and narcotics cases. Every warrant executed, every suspect booked, and every survivor rescued represented one more blow against an underground economy built on silence and fear. Officials say this is only the beginning of a long-term campaign to root out these hidden trafficking enterprises masquerading as legitimate businesses. But even in victory, authorities are cautious. They warn that for every parlor shut down, another may already be opening somewhere else. The syndicates are adaptable, patient, and well-funded. Yet the message from federal agents remains clear. The days of operating in the shadows are over. Behind the quiet signage and dim lights, investigators found a world fueled by control, isolation, and deception. Victims were forced to meet daily quotas, denied freedom, and told repeatedly that American police would never protect them. Many had entered the U.S. legally, on student or work visas, only to find themselves trapped in debt bondage, their lives reduced to a cycle of fear and obedience. Homeland Security officers described what they saw inside as a chain of human confinement. Small rooms lined with soundproofing foam, personal belongings stuffed into plastic bins, and sleeping mats tucked behind curtains. The women lived in silence, their existence hidden from the outside world. As the investigation deepened, agents discovered the sophisticated financial backbone behind the operation. Money flowed through a maze of shell companies in Hong Kong and Macau, disguised as payments for consulting or real estate services. In truth, those transactions represented the profits of human exploitation, carefully fragmented into micropayments to evade financial detection, then reassembled offshore. Digital ledgers showed systematic victim rotations every few months, a deliberate strategy to prevent escape or familiarity. Some women were even trafficked through Canada before being brought into the U.S., highlighting the global coordination of the Syndicate's logistics network. Federal officials now call it one of the most complex trafficking and money laundering pipelines ever discovered on American soil. A dark, sprawling web of deceit built to profit from human misery. Operation Coast to Coast marks not just an enforcement milestone, but a reckoning. It exposed the uncomfortable truth that beneath the surface of everyday America, behind the facades of small businesses and suburban calm, a shadow economy thrives, driven by coercion and silence. And now, for the first time, that silence is being broken. The coordination behind Operation Coast to Coast was as intricate as the network it targeted. Over 150 law enforcement agencies worked together, sharing intelligence through Homeland Security's Human Trafficking Training Center, HTTC. Their goal, to map connections between cities and identify every link in the chain. Each jurisdiction contributed a vital piece, from surveillance and undercover operations to data analysis and financial forensics. The simultaneous raids across 5 states were designed with surgical precision, striking the network in one coordinated blow. The goal was simple: leave no time for suspects to escape, destroy evidence, or warn their superiors. By week's end, 30 individuals were in federal custody, facing charges that ranged from human trafficking and conspiracy to immigration fraud, racketeering, money laundering, and prostitution-related offenses. Among those arrested were several mid-level coordinators, the ones who handled recruitment, purchased airline tickets for victims, and moved illicit funds through offshore accounts. Investigators noted that this is the first case in which federal prosecutors plan to apply racketeering and transnational organized crime statutes, legal tools once reserved for drug cartels and terrorist organizations. One of the most haunting discoveries was the rescue of a 14-year-old girl found during a related operation in another state. She told investigators she had been trafficked through online platforms by a 38-year-old man with prior convictions for identity theft and visa fraud. He was arrested and now faces federal charges for child exploitation and human trafficking. Agents described her story as a tragic glimpse into how deeply this criminal industry reaches and how easily minors can be pulled into digital trafficking, pipelines that exploit both technology and immigration loopholes. Officials stressed that her rescue was not an isolated case. It was evidence of a growing trend. More minors are being lured and trafficked through sophisticated tech-driven networks that hide behind digital anonymity and cross-border movement. As the dust settled from the raids, agents reiterated that Operation Coast to Coast had one mission: to expose the hidden infrastructure of modern slavery within the United States. The arrests, they said, were only the opening phase of a much larger and ongoing campaign, one that aims to dismantle every surviving cell of the network, no matter how deeply it is buried or how many walls it hides behind. Once the final warrants were executed and the suspects were transported into custody, attention shifted from enforcement to recovery. Inside the Federal Command Center overseeing the operation, the focus turned to the human side of the crisis. Dozens of nonprofit partners, including Safe House, Freedom Network USA, and the Salvation Army Trafficking Response Team, were mobilized to support the survivors. Medical units and trauma counselors were dispatched to the raid sites, transforming temporary command posts into triage centers within hours. Many of the women were disoriented, dehydrated, and visibly terrified. Some had not set foot outdoors in months. Translators were brought in to bridge communication gaps, and officers were instructed to treat every rescued person as a survivor, not a suspect. Agents later reflected that this part of the mission was as complex as the raids themselves. They were rescuing people conditioned to fear authority, individuals who had been told that police would never protect them. Federal officials confirmed that the victims' identities are being safeguarded and that applications are underway for T visas, allowing them to remain in the U.S. as witnesses and survivors of trafficking. Each woman was paired with a personal advocate to ensure shelter, medical care, and legal representation. Homeland Security described this humanitarian phase as a critical proof of concept, showing that major criminal takedowns can be executed without abandoning the victims trapped inside them. But the investigation was far from over. The mountain of evidence seized during the raids, computers, ledgers, smartphones, and banking records, will take months to fully analyze. Each device holds the potential to reveal more accomplices, financial conduits, and front businesses operating under false legitimacy across other states. To handle this, the Department of Justice, Homeland Security Investigations, and the IRS Criminal Division formed a joint analytical task force to trace every financial transaction linked to the network. Early findings already point to more than 200 shell accounts distributed across U.S. banks and fintech platforms, with money funneled into overseas corporations and reassembled offshore. DHS cyber units have also traced cryptocurrency wallets connected to the same organization, uncovering how traffickers have begun exploiting digital assets to conceal their profits. Officials say at least a dozen related businesses remain under active surveillance, including nail salons, import-export companies, and wellness centers believed to be operating as replacements for the shuttered massage parlors. The federal mission now is disruption, not merely arresting offenders, but systematically dismantling the infrastructure that allows trafficking to regenerate. Agents are working closely with Interpol and Chinese law enforcement to track down ringleaders believed to be operating from overseas. One senior Homeland Security official described the recent raids as the first domino in a much larger chain. Public reaction to the crackdown has been both emotional and validating. Communities near the raided businesses expressed relief, saying the operation confirmed suspicions they'd held for years. Many residents described seeing women shuttled in window-covered vans late at night, scenes they never imagined were part of something so large or cruel. Advocacy groups are now urging state legislators to introduce stricter regulations for massage and spa businesses, including random inspections, financial transparency requirements, and mandatory background checks for owners. Federal lawmakers have echoed these calls, proposing expanded trafficking task forces and mandatory training for local code inspectors who might otherwise unknowingly approve front operations. For many Americans, this case serves as a sobering wake-up call, a reminder that organized exploitation is not a distant problem in faraway countries. It is happening quietly in suburbs and small towns across the United States. In the final press briefing, Homeland Security officials warned that while Operation Coast to Coast delivered one of the largest trafficking takedowns in recent history, the threat remains active and adaptive. The illicit massage industry, they said, behaves like a hydra. Cut off one head and two more grow back. Businesses rebrand, reopen, and reinvent themselves within months of a raid. That is why federal authorities have vowed that the operation will continue indefinitely, tracking every lead, freezing every account, and exposing every shell business tied to the network. "We're not just chasing traffickers," one federal agent said. "We're dismantling the system that protects them. For the women who were rescued, the road ahead will be long, a journey of healing, rebuilding, and rediscovering freedom. For the agencies involved, the mission isn't over until every hidden corridor, every false storefront, and every trafficker who profits from human suffering is brought to justice." As one senior commander in Washington concluded, this was never just about massage parlors. It was about reclaiming human freedom inside America's own borders. And that fight has only just begun.